Inflation is already here, just look at stock and housing prices. January will finish off what's left of the middle class and get rid of all small businesses. The Fed will use the pandemic as the excuse, just like they did with the housing bubble for the previous implosion. The Fed created this bubble with ultra-low rates and has no way out. If rates are raised, the stock market and housing bust will create another financial crisis bigger than anything we have seen. Might be a good time to short banks. Welcome to the wild world of QE to infinity. Debt doesn't matter, in fact, it's the new money. Keep printing, keep giving out cheap loans, keep propping up the markets, hand out free money, keep credit scores high, and keep people buying, at all costs. That has been working, but for how much longer? And what does it look like when it all comes crashing down? No way it goes on forever. Every record has an end. Make sure you have a chair when the music stops. QE and zero interest rates require full employment to work. In that environment, everyone works until they can't or until they die. Most of the QE goes to the upper 1%. Assets grow in price, which is the method for the skim. The wealth skim then sits in piles. For them, it's all about acquisition and ownership. Not about actually spending cash to improve their lives. Another billion added to the pile adds no benefit. Open borders bring low wages into the mix. Unlimited money printing combined with low wages and a microscopic velocity of money creates no inflation and a competition for dollars among the 99%. QE works in Japan for this reason. But the pandemic brings unemployment into the mix. Big unemployment. Goods and services are created by employment. Unemployment means there are fewer things to buy with all the extra cash coming out of the Fed fire hose. Unlimited cash chasing too few goods and services. What does Econ 101 say about that? The real unknown is how low velocity of money combined with unlimited money printing and high unemployment affects inflation, or hyperinflation. The Fed is the root cause for wealth inequality. The wealthy people are their own banks. Low interest rates encourages the poor to take on debt because it's an illusion, it's free money to use. We need a major rate reset where rates return to the 5 to 7% range. The money is going to the already rich, who already have everything, so maybe they buy another Ferrari or two for their wife, son, daughter, nanny, mistress, but that only promotes the luxury companies, Chanel, Ferrari, Hermes, Patek Philippe, yacht building firms etc. that have very little to do with the economy of billions of people. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. You are here for your daily dose of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to also hit the notification bell. There are a number of factors which keep stock markets inflated. Exceptionally low interest rates lowers the discount rate, raising the price of an asset, Federal Reserve liquidity, lack of alternatives, etc. Nonetheless, this isn't a normal forward-looking scenario. Forward-looking would surely predict lower profit and cash flows. But Federal Reserve purchases of corporate bonds is another thing entirely. The incentive at many companies may be to sell more bonds, why not? The Fed has guaranteed a buyer at low interest rates and then use the proceeds to buy my firm's stock. If I have stock options, I make money. It's a great country if you are wealthy. There is too much money in the hands of people that don't need it, and don't use it. The easiest option is to park it in inflated stocks. This is simply inflation, but in equities. It's the mature trickle-down theory fertilized by ever more lavish gifts from legislators. It's really a problem, and it's the reigning theory throughout the world. It's great for developing nations, like China, but it is hard on working Americans. It's also great for day trades and trading in general. It is easy to move money from those who toss it around carelessly into one's own account. Government debt in the US has increased by more than $4 trillion this year, which adds up to $12,800 per person. The Fed holds the paper on nearly every debt, which is the only thing of value that they have. The dollar is worthless, why would anyone care? Relative to the rest of the world, if the US had an honest money system, those around the world would want to hold and transact in that currency as well, making it the reserve currency. The financial history of this nation, until the antics beginning in 2009, is that Fed funds equal or exceed inflation. Why was that policy in play for 95 years? To protect the holders of dollars from the impact of inflation. Now, however, the game is to steal from the holders of dollars to pump the stock market. This is done by making stocks the only place to put your money. They have denied fixed income as a strategy. But when inflation grinds and pounds the working families of this nation, the turmoil created will force the Fed to finally deal with this tax called inflation, a tax implemented not by Congress but unelected central bankers who are insulated from inflation, like most government workers, by inflation-protected pensions. But what about the rest of us? The financial community are the wolves circling the sheep paddock. Inside the paddock, the Fed is doing the equivalent of overfeeding the sheep. From the wolf's viewpoint, it can see the feed being brought to the paddock. The wolf will also know the day when the sheep will go unfed. What will the sheep do when, a few days later, hunger sets in? Heyday for the wolves. A diet of fat sheep. Both the Fed and ECB have been trying to create inflation off and on for 10 years supposedly through QE and have not succeeded, but the ECB did end up destroying banks, pensions and bond markets while the Fed just destroyed pensions, so why does anyone believe they will do it this time? The only inflation we see in the real economy is cost-push inflation and not demand inflation, which they have been trying to create, which has been caused by the massive lockdowns, which has destroyed whole supply chains with shortages and price increases, especially food, which is spreading to other sectors like electronic parts. The Fed is doing QE because it is deflationary and moves rates lower with their hope the long bond moves to zero bound. Banks will then lend and create liquidity, and borrowers will borrow and the public will buy stuff, and this will increase the velocity of money and they magically get their 2% inflation. Good luck with that. Since commercial banks are the only ones who can create money out of thin air by lending, and they are not lending enough, since more lockdowns are here, more business closures, more job losses and more loan losses for banks. No liquidity is being created. Even if banks do lend and the public borrows, they must buy stuff and not pay down debt or borrow to just survive, as this does not cause demand inflation and enough to increase the velocity of money. The money multiplier and the velocity of money are falling. The Fed data shows about everything is in deflation mode, from the US exporting deflation, trading partners are exporting deflation to us, real estate lending is in deflation mode, consumers are paying down debt, which is capital destruction, which is deflationary, and it goes on. As the lockdowns spread and more job losses and business failures, how in the hell does the Fed or any bank forecaster think that there would be demand inflation with all this going on? Who is going to buy this stuff? That $600 check is going to make everyone whole, with millions, thousands behind on bills, facing evictions, repossessions, and the latest stimulus like the rest is only temporary, and the day of reckoning is coming, and all this must and will come to a head, and that is when all hell breaks loose. QE is the Fed taking assets and their corresponding income streams from banks. Banks simply have their reserves credited, which the Fed still owes for these, as they are liabilities on their balance sheet along with an asset. Banks can only use these as collateral to borrow from the Fed, from other banks, or used to buy treasuries as collateral. Banks must use their own liquidity to buy the assets for QE, $120 billion month. They are not lending or lending enough liquidity to offset what liquidity is taken out of the real economy from the Fed and by those paying down debt, which is capital destruction, which means the Fed is creating monetary deflation as liquidity dries up along with credit. How in the hell is that inflationary, or how is that creating demand inflation? Cost-push inflation is here, which is not caused by the Fed increasing the velocity of money but economic destruction by lockdowns. Banks know this and are simply covering for the lockdowns and its destruction of the economy and capital. The Fed cannot force banks to lend, nor can the Fed cause the velocity of money to increase to create demand inflation, and the last 10 years proves it, both them and the ECB. QE is not adding liquidity to the real economy but removing it, with banks simply having reserves credited, but this never enters the real economy but stays in the Federal Reserve System, which is banks, primary dealers, and the Fed. QE is deflationary, pushing rates down with the hope banks will then lend, the public will borrow, the public will buy stuff, and enough to increase the velocity, and then inflation. The increase in M1 money supply is caused by banks lending, which is contracting, lending, the public moving M2 assets, savings, CDs under $100,000, retail money market securities, etc., to cash to survive. M2 is increasing from the public, large financial firms, institutional funds, etc., converting assets that then show up in M2 or M1 if cash, all causing these two money supply categories to increase, giving the illusion that the Fed is creating money out of thin air. But all of this except what was created by bank lending was already in the system and just converted and then moved, which then shows up in the two most common indicators that the public uses to follow the money supply. But they do not indicate if the increase was from another money supply category or did the Fed really create money out of thin air. The way the Fed measures inflation is bogus, nothing like what the worker experiences. We are well past 2% already. Inflation of money takes 18 months to get to Main Street. That means even the 2019 print fest hasn't arrived yet. Just wait for that 3 trillion madness to arrive. It is off the scales. Never before tried territory. And they are talking about even more. That 18-month lag is deadly. When inflation comes, the politicians will be blaming everybody but the Fed for the inflation. They surely will do something stupidly misdirected to try to fix it. Instead of handing out inflated money to everyone, start up the public works programs, like what we had back during the Great Depression, and pay people to work on public work projects, like roads, railroads, airports, hospitals. We have a critical need for them now. Improve health care, communication systems, affordable housing, revitalize the rural areas, revitalize businesses, rebuild our schools, recycling materials, demolishing the shanty towns to clean up the nation, etc. It would do a lot from the standpoint of giving a lot of our unemployed people jobs, giving them something to be proud about, improve the nation's infrastructure, actually producing something for trade, and to keep our dollar from hyperinflating. The US did it back in the 1930s and the Chinese did it over the last 30 years. In each case, it worked. We need it again. This was the Atlantis Report. Please like, share, leave me a comment, subscribe. And please take